There is a mistake that almost every American makes. It doesn't feel like a mistake. No debt collector calls you about it. No bank sends you a warning letter. There's no red flag, no overdraft fee, no angry email from your landlord. In fact, the mistake feels completely responsible. It usually sounds like this: I'll start investing once I have more money. That one sentence, repeated for about 10 years, can quietly cost the average person somewhere around $100,000. Not because they spent it, not because they lost it in a bad trade, but because they simply waited. And the strange part is, the financial industry knows this. They've known it for decades. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If waiting is this expensive, why does almost nobody warn you about it clearly? Let's follow the money. Here's why this matters right now. In 2026, more than almost any other point in modern history, wages have grown slowly, rent has grown fast, groceries cost more than they did 5 years ago. So when someone says, invest early, a lot of people hear something closer to must be nice. It's not that people don't want to invest. It's that the system is built in a way that makes waiting feel harmless, even smart, until it's too late to undo. And there's a psychological trap hiding inside that feeling. Humans are wired to weigh immediate certain costs, like a smaller paycheck this month, far more heavily than distant, uncertain rewards, like a bigger retirement account decades from now. Behavioral economists have a name for this: present bias. It's the same instinct that makes a gym membership easy to cancel and a dessert easy to order. Waiting to invest doesn't feel like losing money because the loss hasn't happened yet. It's a debt you don't notice you're accumulating because no one ever sends you a bill for it. So let's look at the visible problem first because it looks completely rational on the surface. A 25-year-old graduates with student debt. She gets her first real job. She tells herself she'll pay off debt first, save an emergency fund second, and start investing once things settle down. That plan sounds mature, financially literate even. The problem is what's happening quietly in the background while she waits. To understand it, you need to understand one mechanism that the entire financial system runs on: compound growth. Here's the plain English version. When you invest money, it doesn't just sit there. It earns returns. And then, the next year, you earn returns on your original money and on the returns from before. It snowballs. Slowly at first, then dramatically. Think of it like a snowball rolling down a hill. At the top, it's small, and rolling it feels pointless. Near the bottom, the same snowball is enormous because it's been picking up size the entire way down. The hill doesn't care when you started. It just keeps rolling as long as you're on it. This is why financial institutions almost never emphasize the word time as loudly as they emphasize the word amount. It's easier to sell someone a bigger contribution than to explain that 10 quiet years of doing nothing can never be recovered, no matter how much money you throw at it later. Picture two friends. Both open retirement accounts. One, we'll call him the early starter, puts in $300 a month starting at 25, then stops entirely at 35 and never adds another dollar. The other, the late starter, waits until 35 to begin, then contributes that same $300 a month all the way to retirement at 65. The late starter puts in money for 3 times as many years. On paper, it looks like he should end up far ahead, but because the early starter's money had 10 extra years to compound before the late starter even began, the early starter often still finishes with more, or close to it, despite contributing for a fraction of the time. That's not a trick of the math. That's the entire point of compounding. It rewards the calendar more than it rewards the size of your monthly deposit. Here's the reveal. If someone invests a modest amount starting at age 25, using the historical long-term average return of the U.S. stock market, roughly 7% annually after inflation, they end up, by retirement age, with a noticeably larger balance than someone who invests the exact same amount in the exact same way, but starts at age 35 instead. The second person isn't lazy. They aren't investing less money over their working life. In many cases, they contribute more per month once they finally start. Trying to catch up, it usually isn't enough because the first 10 years of a snowball rolling downhill aren't replaceable. You can add size later. You cannot add the years. This is where the number $100,000 comes from. It's not a fixed rule. and it changes depending on income, contribution size, and market performance. But financial researchers have repeatedly estimated that a single decade of delay for an average earner can leave a six-figure hole in someone's retirement by the time they're 65, roughly $100,000, sometimes more. Now follow the money, because this is where it gets interesting. Who benefits from people waiting? Not the individual, definitely not them, but somebody does. Every year, someone doesn't invest. That money sits in checking accounts, low-interest savings accounts, or gets spent on short-term lifestyle upgrades. Banks earn from that money staying liquid and accessible. Retailers benefit from the spending that happens instead of investing. And financial advisors, ironically, often earn more helping someone catch up later with larger fee-generating portfolios than they would have earned managing smaller amounts a decade earlier. Nobody is conspiring here. There's no secret meeting where anyone decided to keep people waiting. It's simpler and, in some ways, more unsettling than that. The system is just neutral. It rewards early participants and quietly costs late ones, and very few institutions have a financial incentive to interrupt that pattern. Even the products marketed as helpful often depend on delay to exist. Debt consolidation services, high-interest credit cards, buy now, pay later apps, and subscription-based budgeting tools all thrive in the years when people are managing money reactively instead of investing proactively. None of these businesses are villains. They're simply built to profit from the exact behavior that costs the individual the most over time, staying in a cycle of short-term financial management instead of long-term ownership. Even the language around money reflects this. We talk about saving for a rainy day, but we rarely talk about investing for one, and that small wording difference matters more than it seems. Saving implies protecting money. Investing implies putting it to work. A society that talks constantly about saving and rarely about investing quietly nudges people toward caution over growth, even when growth was the better long-term choice all along. So who pays? The person who waited. Every single time. Not through a fee, not through a fine, through an invisible number that never appears on a bank statement. The amount they would have had if they'd simply started sooner. That's part of what makes this mistake so easy to make. There's no receipt for money you never earned. Now let's compare myth versus reality, because this is where most people get it backwards. The myth is that investing requires being rich first, that you need thousands of dollars, deep market knowledge, or a lucky pick to make it worthwhile. The reality is closer to the opposite. The earlier you start, even with small amounts, the less skill and luck you actually need, because time is doing most of the heavy lifting. A modest, boring, consistent contribution started early tends to outperform a large, aggressive contribution started late, purely because of how many years it has to compound. This is also why employer retirement matches, the kind offered through many U.S. jobs, are treated by financial researchers as one of the highest value opportunities most workers ever get. A typical match might work like this. For every dollar an employee contributes to their retirement account, up to a certain percentage of their salary, the employer adds another dollar on top, essentially free money added to the snowball before it even starts rolling. When an employer matches a percentage of what you contribute, declining to take it isn't cautious. It's leaving guaranteed money on the table, then losing an additional decade of growth on top of it. Surveys of American workers have consistently found that a meaningful share of employees eligible for a match don't take full advantage of it, often for the same reason the 25-year-old in our earlier example gave. They plan to get to it later, once life feels more settled. Now zoom out, because this isn't really a story about one person's decision. It's a story about how modern economies quietly sort people into two very different financial futures, based on a decision most of them never realized they were making. Two people can work the same job, earn the same salary, and retire with dramatically different outcomes, not because one was smarter, but because one started participating in the system 10 years before the other. Multiply that gap across an entire generation, and you start to see something larger than personal finance. You start to see a structural pattern in who ends up financially secure at 65 and who doesn't. Not purely about income, not purely about spending habits, largely about timing, and about how early someone was nudged, taught, or exposed to the idea that starting small immediately beats waiting for the right moment that never quite arrives. So here's the question worth sitting with. If 10 quiet years of waiting can cost the average person around $100,000, and almost nobody is told this clearly before it's too late to change course, then how many other financial mistakes are we making right now, silently, simply because no one explained the cost of waiting?